either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird MicroViews. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And it's finally time to, kick off our second ever Folktober.
Yeah.
This year we travel east from the UK to explore a vastly different group of folklore, the land of the rising sun, Japan.
You have been very excited for this one for a while.
I have been. I mean, granted, I love Japanese movies, so that's no shocker there.
Sure.
But also, it's an interesting topic that I just like folklore in general, and this one is such a weird, complex group of folklore that...
Yeah. It's very different than, I think, what we're mostly used to folklore-wise.
Yes, and we'll get it. I think we've mentioned it a couple times in our pregame to this when we talked about how Shintoism and Buddhism kind of fused and blended together, / they're still separate entities, and how difficult Shintoism is to actually describe because it is a folk religion and there's not some central church of Shintology.
Sure, yeah. No, that's true.
And so, to kick this off, we decided to do something that's a little classic that kind of brought a revitalization to the yokai genre itself. We are doing Yokai Monsters, 100 Monsters.
Yes.
The start of a trilogy of movies, and in case you didn't guess, there are monsters in this movie.
There was a lot of monsters in this movie, and I especially liked this movie because this movie, especially if you are not used to the yokai monster, this one played very much like an old Universal monster film, and I loved that. Yeah,
and at the same time, it's kind of childish at times.
It is. There's a lot of, silliness to a lot of the monsters, and, I think part of that was because of how, the filming techniques that were used. There's a lot of practical effects that even for 1968, they knew were going to look a little goofy, so they kind of leaned in just a little bit.
Well, yeah, and that's just also what they had to work with, and on top of that, it is that playfulness, because if anyone's listened to our last MicroView, when we did the Great Yokai War, that's loosely based off the second movie in this franchise, which that second movie is loosely based off Gegege no Kitaro.
Yeah, and also this one being a 68 release, so Japan had a huge monster boom from 66 to 68. That was a huge topic in movies, TV shows, and especially children content. So even though this movie is not for kids, the fact that there is some childish elements makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And we'll get into the plot just a little bit, because the reason this one's also a good intro is because the yokai aren't really the main characters of this movie. They're kind of in the background, and
it feels very much like a Universal Studios monster film where the monsters are a big portion, but they're not the main character. They're the spooks happening to the characters.
It's kind of like how in the original Mummy franchise, it's never Imhotep is the bad guy. It's always the person controlling Imhotep who's obviously wanting to bone the lady figure in the movie, but...
Always, every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yes. This was a delight to watch, not just because the practical effects are still fun. They still read very, interesting, at least, to, see how one would come up with some of these monsters, because they are fairly complicated at times.
Yes, and I'll get into that a little bit on what exactly a yokai is.
Sure.
So, Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters is written and directed by Tetsuro Yoshida and directed by Kimiyoshi Yasuda. Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters follows a group of tenement residents aided by the local yokai fighting against corrupt officials seeking to take down their homes in the local shrine.
It has a nice, especially at the beginning, a nice setting of very familiar, samurai films of the 60s, which I enjoyed because it kind of sets you up. And then it moves into more of a monster flick, which was fun transition, because otherwise this would have been almost a repeat of a couple other samurai films.
It would have just been a very generic, power-tripping landlord type of movie.
Yes, and instead it's a wonderful revenge story.
It's starring Jun Fujimaki as Yasutaro, Miwa Takada as Okiku, Masaru Hirazumi as Takichi, writer Yoshida and director Yasuda.
Yes.
Both previously had worked on other folk horror films such as Daimajin, of which Yoshida wrote the 3 Daijimin movies and the Yokai Monster movies. And while Shida also worked on the Zatoichi movies, Yasuda worked on 6 other Zatoichi movies, starting with the film Zatoichi on the Road, which is one of their earlier Zatoichi movies.
It makes sense. You can see some of the influences, I think.
As for the cast, Fujimaki and Takada were both in Daijimin, which I'm going to correct myself. Daimajin came out after this, I believe. But they've worked on other folklore films.
Sure.
But honestly, I couldn't find anything that Fujimaki would have been in that people would have been familiar with. And as for Takada, they were in the Zatoichi films as well.
Sure.
And the only other role for Hirozumi was in the 1966 movie, The Betrayal.
Oh, haven't seen that one.
Nah, it's drama.
I might watch it.
But before we really even get into Yokai 100 Monsters, I do briefly want to go over what yokai are, because it's interesting how it evolved, and I think we in the West 100% have no knowledge of where this word comes from. It's just like, okay, yokai.
Yeah, I like the movie, at least the DVD doesn't even say Yokai Monsters, 100 Monsters, it just says 100 Monsters across the front, because that does wrap it up pretty well.
Yeah, even though it's technically the Monsters collection, but it is also Arrow, so
yeah,
I would expect them to know their audience, or think their audience would know what yokai are. But
one would think, but you never know with creative liberty.
No. But as explored in the Book of Yokai by Michael Dillon Foster, yokai is an umbrella term for mysterious phenomena and creatures. And because of that, it's constantly evolving and changing. He even mentions in the book that he went to a recent yokai fan convention or meetup, where a group of people were creating their own yokais based off their problems. And like they had practices in school of, this is how you create a yokai, of you're having this issue. What's the physical manifestation of this, or the creature manifestation?
Very fun.
And with that, the term yokai is actually a more recent term. In the Heian period, the last classical period of Japanese history, these kind of occurrences and things were called mononoke. Similar to what we briefly mentioned this in our review of the tale of the Princess Kaguya, where her father asked if she could be a mononoke. Yeah. Granted, in the English translation, it says something different, but
I think they call her fairy or something like that.
Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so along the right lines, but still, if you listen to the dialogue, that's a cool thing. If you know that, rewatching the Tale of Princess Kaguya, knowing they're using the classical terms.
Yeah, that is cool.
As well, at this time, there was the Oni, or the Hyakyakyo, or the night procession of 100 demons, or 100 Oni, and these fell into kind of a little bit of different categories.
Okay.
As well as there was a comedic take on the Hyakyagyo, and that was the Tsukumogami, which there was a parade of invented things. So like the creatures that took on the persona of like Lutz, or the umbrella with one leg and a face, those type of silly creatures.
Sure.
And later in the Edo period, the term bakemono, or changing thing, that we do still see use in modern movies as well as anime and a bunch of other stuff, is more similar to the English monster. Now, the term yokai itself originated around the 18th century, and it takes its kanji from 2 characters meaning strangeness, mystery, or suspicion.
Oh, very good, very good.
And so it has its roots in Chinese wordage, because for those who don't know, kanji are the Chinese characters that were adapted by the Japanese.
Makes sense.
But it also didn't rise to prominence as the catch-all term we know of today until the Meiji period, which began around 1868 to 1912.
Okay.
Tangentially, a side note, but there's also at the time references to kami, which are gods. So we see that in this movie as well. So just breaking down some of the terminology.
Definitely.
And some out there might be asking, well, what about kaiju? And trust me, we will do that.
We will.
Because there is something related to it. But that's for a later date, as well as we're going to talk about yurei in our first deep dive. Because even though yurei are sometimes considered yokai, they're also ghosts, so they're different. There's a debate on whether they are yokai or not.
Sure. I like this movie's simplification of yokai. Everything that you see in this film is considered yokai, and essentially they are silly spooks. Some a little less silly, some a little more silly, but they are all spooks.
Exactly, and that's why this movie well, it's a good introduction to this because we see, I think it's maybe like 10 or 11 of these things.
Yeah, and like if you really wanted to, you could fully read and like learn all about every single one, but you don't need to enjoy the movie in any way.
No, exactly. And even then, the Arrow booklet comes with a nice spreadable mini poster. Yeah. That on one side gives the names, and then on the other side, it gives the names and the descriptions and how they were actually changed a little bit for the movie. Again, yokai are evolving. Like, there's one in this that's a fire eater, but in the movie, it breathes fire instead. So playing on those typical characters and changing them just ever so slightly, showing how things can evolve.
Definitely.
So, Yokai Monsters, 100 Monsters. There's something special about this movie because it does try starting off a little spooky.
It does, and I love it. And when we say spooky, this movie, I don't even think intentionally, but fully uses the little ghost noise from the 90s. The
yeah, the theremin music. Yeah. Like that's throughout most of this movie.
It's delightfully 90s Halloween in feel with being from the 60s in Japan.
Yeah. No, I mean, 60s and horror in general. I mean,
it's the perfect Halloween movie. The spooks are good and spooky, but no one that is like good and like you care about gets hurt or spooked too bad. It's just the assholes who have it coming. You don't even need to have very good recognition of who's doing what. You can just be like, generic person? Okay.
Yeah, you know the landlord, you know the landlord's special needs kid.
Yeah, you sure do.
And you know the main trio romantic group / one of them is a samurai.
It does help that the only, like, man that's the good guy that you truly care about is the only man with a full head of hair because he's the, like, dispatched samurai, essentially.
Yeah, the shogun,
the masterless samurai. I think
he's actually an investigator, but he's walking around like he's a ronin.
Yeah, so he's got the full head of hair, which helps a lot because everyone else in this movie has the same goddamn hairstyle, and we've talked about this. I can't tell who you are.
I know you can't. So that does definitely help you there.
And then the two girls that we care about who are like on the good side. One wears the most bright pink flowery nonsense known to man, and the other one dresses normally. So I'm good there too. I enjoyed this movie. I could tell who everyone was.
And by normally, I think you mean for a period piece.
It is a period piece. Let's be very like forward about that. Like this is very samurai, like village set. 3 places really in total, but like you don't care and you don't mind.
No, and I think that's what makes this movie stand out is because it is so much about the human drama, and it's this integration of, regardless of the human drama going around, there's the supernatural, regardless of whether because the yokai really aren't there to help the tenement housing people.
No, they're there because someone was stupid and wouldn't, like, finish the ghost story curse.
Well, yeah, didn't. So that's another thing to play on the tradition of telling 100 ghost stories, and then it makes me think of like how we have the Ouija board.
Sure. And I mean, okay, so this is a 60s movie, and if you go back a good ways in like especially American Halloween tradition, ghost stories were a huge part of Halloween for a very long time. And this idea of blowing out candles and then there being a spook at the end of the ghost stories is exactly what a children's Halloween party would have looked like in the 40s, 50s, and 60s as well. So I love that there is a similarity there. It's just visually, stylistically different. Like, instead of sitting around a little wood table with chairs and, like, bobbing for apples and grabbing up flaming raisins with your bare hands.
Yeah.
They're just lounging around on the floor, having little nibbles.
Well, it's a formal get-together. It's
very
not
formal.
Just lounging around, Chris.
The main guy is fully lounged.
Well, because he can. He's
true.
The Lord.
That's true.
But yeah, I do think it is interesting to see that even at this time, or at the making of this movie, they're setting it up where people are like, "Oh, that's silly. No one ever actually believes that stuff." It's kind of how we talked about how witches and stuff, where at certain points in history, they're like, "Yeah, witches don't exist."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, this is very similar in idea, and like I think that's part of the reason why the storytelling portion focuses so heavily on this being like a curse as opposed to like yokai being quote unquote real. And why it like I think makes this movie stand better like through time is because there's not this like need to suspend disbelief It's more of like, oh, well, they saw monsters, but in reality, they were struck by lightning. Sucks to suck.
Or were they?
Or were they? Yeah. I like the ambiguity there. I also think that the drama that is like the main focus of the movie between the tenants and the lower class and the Lord and his goonies is a tale as old as time, and I think it stands up very well. It's still one that even if you're not Japanese or you're not familiar, you can understand this problem very well, and it makes a very clear good guy, bad guy.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's setting up that, I mean, some of it's, I think it's a little out there where this guy's going to take down an entire tenement housing to put up brothels.
I mean, yes, but also, like, it's the way that it's shown is even if you don't have, like, a good, like, comprehension of, you know, old-timey Japan, it's still pretty clear that these are, like, the, like, low-end income housing, and, like, those being demoed for, like, a casino or a new horse race track. Like, that tracks. That's something that, like, I can understand and, like, fully get behind, like, the demonization of, like, oh, I'm just going to tear the houses down around these people and not give them any options.
Yeah, basically turning human necessity into a den of sin.
Exactly.
But also in this taking down of things, it's important to know, like, that shrine that they bring up. I think this is where it gets really interesting, where they start really early on blending the folklore and the horror with it, or the quote-unquote horror. It's
not spooky.
No, not at all. But the shrine itself, they mentioned that it's forgotten. No one even knows what it's there for anymore. Yeah. And it's just this idea that even old forgotten shrines are dangerous, and even the old forgotten gods are dangerous. It reminds me a little bit of, there's this manga called PTSD Radio that's got a lot of elements like that, but never explains anything.
Sure. Oh yeah, no, like this idea of, like, forgotten gods is something I think that's recently become very popular with a couple different authors' writings.
Yeah, didn't Neil Gaiman do something with that?
He did. And so, like, the idea is definitely one that's interested people for a long time. I know there's also an anime that's kind of based around a similar idea, though I think it leans more into different storylines.
Noragami.
That's a good example one, definitely. So it does integrate, but it doesn't rely so heavily on you understanding, like, all about shrines and, like, why no one would remember, or, like, who's taking care of this thing. Because they just kind of briefly go, oh yeah, man, this thing was really hard to tear down. Can't wait to get started on these people's houses so they can all be homeless. Oh boy. And you're like, wow, okay, so you were the worst. Got it.
Well, and it's also a good way to, like, build up the yokai themselves, because for the most part, no one in this movie can really see them unless the yokai is messing with them, or if it's Shinkichi, the touch child.
Well, that might be why he can see them.
Yeah, no, well, it's that idea that it's harder to see this type of realm the older you get, because you lose that childlike nature or the childlike wonder of what could be, or you don't believe the stories anymore.
Sure.
As shown by the adults tearing down the shrine, that regardless of whether they know what it is or not, the folks around the shrine still take care of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when the shrine gets taken down is when the yokai start acting, because obviously it's something that's tied to them, but there's that mystery that's, why are they attached to the shrine?
True. And I also like that it adds that level of spiritualism, and then we add on the ghost stories and how, like, oh, there's a ritual you have to do afterwards to make sure the ghosts don't get you. And it's the way it's said and the way that the translation on the bottom of the screen runs, it all flows very nicely for an English understander. And so you're like, well, of course you don't want to be cursed by ghosts. You must do whatever this little old man who's telling the story says. And they're like, no. We're good. The ghosts can't get us. And you're like, okay.
Again,
see? You brought this on yourself.
Because before we even really get into their portion of the plot, it's showing that they're not willing to follow any type of rules, whether it be rules of man or rules of the spirit world.
And it's not even, like, a big ceremony either. It's not like it's going to take them hours. It's, like, 5 minutes worth of, like, all right, everyone, clap a few times, do a little dance, good to go.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, too, is I think that is what, again, like, what really makes this movie stand out compared to other movies of a similar nature, like yokai and whatnot, is that it isn't about the yokai. They're not that important. They're not like The Great Yokai War, which is a good movie in its own right.
Yeah, but there's such a, like, critical part that they're almost a character. These are just, like, almost visions.
Yeah, same thing with the other two yokai movies, Spook Warfare, which is all about them and dealing with some ancient god, Mesopotamian god. And granted, that's also because they had a change from Gegege no Kitaro that was very critical of the Americans at that time in history.
The other thing that I think makes this movie especially fun is the practical effects. They are very specific styled. They remind me so much of Godzilla, like the old Godzillas, in like how things are filmed, and like if you angle the camera just right, you can get away with like her head being up at the top of the door frame, but her body must be at the bottom. Ooh,
yeah,
sort of like trickery, and I love it because I think it adds a charm to it. So that even though it's not spooky, I don't know if it was ever actually considered spooky. I'm guessing not.
No, I think it was like for the children's movie. I think it was more geared towards a younger audience because like in reality there's only like 15 minutes of actual quote-unquote horror.
Yeah, it reminds me so much of a Goosebumps film without being overly corny. I mean, it's still corny, but it's not that bad. No,
and I think it's a nice display of the diversity of the yokai because like we get the Mujina, which are those faceless ghosts. We also get the, I don't know its name, it's the umbrella.
Yeah, the hopping thing, the Kasa Obaka.
Yes.
I wrote it down.
I probably should have too, but yeah, it's a fun play on all that. And like you brought up the practical effects, that one, the Kase Obaka, you can see the string on it a couple 100%. Times.
Okay, that is something that I would like to make a strong note of. I was bullied into watching a new film with my beloved husband because he complains that I watch the same thing over and over again, and that is true. And so I was like, well, look, we have a new movie. I have to watch it, so I can't get out of it. It's new to you. You've never seen it. Let's watch it. This movie is not meant for 4K TV. This movie is much better on the small, grainy TV if you have an option, because the yokai are silly. They are being held up by strings that you can very easily see. Also, every single person's wig line is blaringly obvious.
Yeah.
Like, you can see the mesh with a 4K TV.
Yeah, that's a little hard on some of these other ones, especially when they upscale them too, or they retouch it up. Sometimes that stuff doesn't carry over. Like, this was meant to be watched a little bit blurry. Yeah, maybe technology isn't needed.
I don't think so. I think, because I watched this twice. I watched it on the big TV. I enjoyed myself greatly. However, I was like, boy, I wonder if this would look better on my little tube TV. And I was right. It looked much better on the tube TV. A lot of the complaints I had as far as like costuming or makeup solved by some blurriness and grain.
No, exactly.
Yeah. Where the monsters looked much better. No, you could still see that they're made of like cardboard paper and like paper mache. However, it was a charm level as opposed to like violently seeing hot glue streaks.
Yes.
So just as a warning, if you're gonna watch this one, maybe turn the like ability of your TV down a bit, because ours is the special one that like fills in the gaps and like hyper realizes things for you, and I'm like, you don't need to do that, TV. No, thank you.
No, exactly. But also, I think the important thing with like the yokai being included is they only really appear to the bad people, or again, Shinichi, whatever his name is. Shinichi.
Yeah.
But it's this, and the way they do it is they're tricking them into killing each other, where it's bad people who deserve. I don't think they deserve to die, but
they are literally trying to murder these tenants, because the tenants are like, you haven't even given us time to find another place to live. What if we just barricade ourselves inside? And they're all like, hands down, we'll just murder you.
Fair.
There's like 10 guys standing there who could have been like, boss man, I don't feel comfortable killing people by pulling rubble down onto their head. And all of them are in the background like, yeah, we'll get you, pores.
Because they're gonna get money out of it, that's right.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe they do deserve to die.
The only two who I could maybe understand a little bit the argument of like, I don't know if they needed to be struck by lightning and haunted, are the two guys fishing when they were told not to.
Yeah.
Because it does appear that like, they don't have food because they wasted all their money gambling.
No, I'm pretty sure that's from like the third movie in this collection.
It might be, but I do know that, okay, so they're fishing in a pond they're not supposed to be. They're excited about a carp, which, okay, I I know you have outdoors experience. I don't know if you've ever had the joy of deciding whether or not to eat carp. Carp is not good. Carp is bad. Carp tastes bad.
I think it depends on how you prepare it.
They're eating it raw.
Yeah, they are doing carp sashimi.
It not ideal. This is a desperate meal. And like clearly wife is like, I hope you came home and I hope you brought all your money back with you when you came home. And they're like, nope, we sure didn't. Go get us more drinking wine, lady. And you're like, okay, well. Yeah,
no, that's a different that's one of the later movies in the franchise.
Okay, well these gentlemen are also questionably on the line of like how morally they needed to be killed by lightning / monsters.
Well, but that's the thing is that scene only happens when they take down the shrine.
That's true. Well, and they
cool
did
eclipse.
It is. And they did get warned by a monk man who did awkwardly, creepily stand there and stare at them and wait for them to leave and then shuffle away so slowly that everyone was like, boy, if only these two gentlemen could take a hint, we would all be saved this embarrassment.
Yeah. So, with them haunting, what do you think of the final fight, or the final...
Like the...
spook?
The big showbig of all of them showing up at once?
Yeah.
I enjoyed it because it felt like a traditional, like, spooky story sort of ending where, like, all of the monsters then haunt the big bad guy. We know that he's even worse than what we thought because our samurai hero has been spying on him and he knows that he's been lying. And has confronted him, be like, you're a liar, you're gonna get caught. And he's like, nobody can catch me. Rah! Oh, I'm a big bad man. And he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna have the police here in 3 days because it's the oldie times. And the ghosts are like, watch, bet. We're here now. Woo! And it's theremin music the whole time.
Yeah.
There's like a wonderful array. If you are into yokai, there's a great array of like ones to pull out in the background, be like, oh, there's Umbrella Man, oh, there's Faceless Guy, oh, there's the kid who's like a sake pourer. I can't remember what his role is, but he's got like a big head.
Oh, he's the leader. He is the oil reducer.
He's there. There's a bunch of them there, and even if you don't know their names or what exactly they do, you know they're spooky. They do a little fun dance. And then they fade into the distance background, much like the old-timey spooks should.
Yeah, showing that they're not physical or he can't attack them with his sword. And
yeah, like it's a wonderful ghost story. And I really like that because I don't think we've had a whole lot of proper like spook movies come out like in recent years that fit the same level of like fun, but also a good moral story in a way.
Yeah, it's a lot of art house and questioning things instead of the more straightforward stories like this one where it's like it's in line with the Grimm's fairy tales or Hans Christian Andersen.
I would argue that the last time we truly had like a movie styling like this was unfortunately the Goosebumps movies, which granted had a budget of $2 and some gum and were working with very children books, whereas this children appropriate but not necessarily directly for and by children.
Yeah, and that is a weird thing because I feel, and granted, we've talked about my understanding of what a kid's movie is and what a kid's movie isn't.
That's okay.
I personally feel that this could easily be a kid's movie.
I agree. I did watch this one with caution because some of these older movies are not rated and it makes it hard to know if they are not rated because there's boobs somewhere in the movie, or if they're not rated because like it's an old-timey movie and like meh. Yeah,
well, I don't know if Japan had a rating system at this point.
I don't think they did, because everything that I could find, people were like, it's not rated, but like there's nothing wrong, like meh.
Yeah, it's not like watching the 30s Return to Hell House and full frontal nudity.
Yeah, none of that. This one, I would say the only thing to keep in mind if you are going to watch this with kiddos is, I agree, I do think this is a kiddos movie. This is not a little kiddos movie. The spooks are spooky enough for, an elementary school age kid.
That last scene and when they tear down the shrine, those are the two scenes I could definitely see kids having a hard time with.
Yeah, there's a little bit of very fake blood from being stabbed, but not that bad. If you watch the 10 Commandments, you've seen more blood.
Yeah, it's not Sanjuro, the pump lip breaks and
no
blood spurt.
No, everything is very silly and very goofy, and everything is given a good moral reason for why the spooks are being spooked, which I think lends itself to a good kid's early beginnings to spooky movies. No. Having just spooks for the sake of spooks is not every kid's cup of tea, and I get that. This one, I think, is a good introduction if your kid is interested in old-timey movies, which that might be a hard sell, but
I
if you are interested and they want to watch, I think you're safe.
Yeah, I think it's one that they could definitely appreciate as a kid, or just I like the visuals enough, even if they can't read it.
I do think that there's definitely going to be plenty of kids who, like us, we're weirdo kids, who will enjoy the monsters, the yokai, a lot. Even though these are goofy-looking monsters made of paper mache and a couple paper clips and some very visual string, they're still fun, and they're very distinct. The way the movie goes about, like, magicking them into existence is fun, and it's easy enough to figure out if your kid's old enough to understand a little bit of, like, film theory. So I think it's a really great introduction to not just, like, yokai and monsters, but also some, like, film ability as well.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And especially with that, even though there's that big spooky part at the end, the yokai parade at the gates makes me think of the more playful version of the Parade of Demons, which is
I agree.
The Tsuku Mogami. So that
Sure.
Even though I know it's more like, it's supposed to be more like the Hakyagyo,
Yeah, no.
it feels more playful than that.
I would agree. There's a lot of dancing, there's a lot of being silly at the end that kind of lightens the mood, and everyone who was good throughout the film gets rewarded by not having their house torn down.
Yeah. Well, and this is also like the second movie we've seen this happen in.
That's true.
Pompoko did a very similar thing, but in a different light.
Yeah.
They're also still kind of very playful and fun at the same time.
That's true. There is, I think, only one character who is a little bit questionable, but I think the way they handle him is fairly well done. Like, the Lord's son
Yes.
could have been a very dangerous character, but I think they handled it well for a 60s film. They don't say anything about him other than that he embarrasses his father by his mere existence.
Yeah, clearly has special needs.
Yeah, and he's not punished for it either. He sees yokai, but he just has a good time. He doesn't die.
Yeah, they can't well, to be fair, also with the Lord is, he doesn't really do anything with his kid. It's always having his wife or someone else take care of him.
And at the end of the movie, wife, despite crying her eyes out because her, rich husband is dead, her and son are fine. So, like, I like this movie as far as, like, a beginning horror, because, again, there's no, like, being haunted just for the sake of haunting. You did something to deserve the spooks.
Yeah, she's not being punished because of the actions of her husband.
And neither is her son, which is good, because the son is, like, bringing out the little, like, umbrella monsters because he thinks they're funny.
Yeah, he has multiple parties with them, too.
He does. And honestly, they seem like they're having a great time.
Exactly. In a way, he's very much their mentality. They're just having fun. It's like the end of the Great Yokai War. They're just partying.
They are. And I also really like the umbrella scene with him because the animation style here is a very traditional Japanese animation style. I think it lends itself really well to the rest of the movie. It doesn't feel overly nice, especially for 68. They could have done a much fancier version of animation for a Japanese film. This feels like it's in line with the rest of the film. It doesn't feel like any different style-wise, despite this being the only animated scene in the whole film.
No, it's fun and whimsical.
It is, and I like that he's painted all of these umbrellas across his room.
Yeah. So, Chris, rent, buy, stream, or decline that we ever watched it despite having an audio recording of us watching it.
I really enjoyed this one. I also, despite normally not being a super big fan of the Arrow Collection versions, I might look into getting this one on the Arrow Collection. I liked the pamphlet it came with. I liked that it comes with all 3 movies. This DVD alone had some pretty good stuff. I thought the translation was really nice. My only complaint is that it was a little bit too nice. Gotta watch it on the old TV.
Yeah, I'm in the camp of buy it. I personally really enjoy this collection altogether as an intro to yokai.
I do too.
Because while there are yokai, and granted the second one is much more heavily focused on the yokai.
Sure.
It's still, the first one is that great introduction where if you're not familiar with it, you can watch the movie for the drama and be like, okay, I can see why they brought the spooky stuff in. It's a folktale to tell people not to be this. Don't tear down tenement housing, or actually no, it's not even about don't tear down tenement housing. It's don't tear down the shrine, the old ass shrine,
and threaten to murder people.
No, not even that. It's just don't tear down the shrine, because I don't think the yokai would have acted unless if they hadn't torn down the shrine. It's
hard to say. I like that it's so ambiguous as to what truly brings on the monsters. There's a couple of things that you could be like, don't be an asshole. Listen to old random men who are telling you spooky stories. Don't tear down churches and shrines.
Yep. Pretty much.
Easy peasy.
Yeah, so I'm definitely in the buy it range of...
Same. It's also got beautiful spooky time vibes.
Mhm.
It fits right in with a hot cup of something and a cool winter, cool fall day. This is a perfect fall edition if you're a little bit bored of normal Halloween movies.
Yeah, it also comes with a great Yokai War, which...
Another good fall movie, actually.
Yeah. So, definitely a nice light start to the month of Folktober with a kind of spooky movie that's technically horror like King Kong, but not very spooky.
It does list itself as fantasy horror, but I would argue there's very little horror.
Very little fantasy either.
That's true. There's just some spooks. It's a great movie.
Yeah. But anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird MicroViews.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.